Welcome to CyberSecurity Heroes, an IRONSCALES podcast about you, the heroes of cybersecurity. You're about to hear and learn practical and experiential knowledge in our conversations with security leaders and practitioners and other influential InfoSec stars, so we can become more cyber resilient and safer together. CyberSecurity Heroes is brought to you by IRONSCALES, the most powerfully simple email security platform. And I'm your host, Brendan Rudd. And now, let's get into the show. Hey Muli, welcome to the show.
Hi Brendan, I will say Alan.
Hope you don't mind me using your nickname as well.
Yeah, that's okay. Shmuel is something, the ancient times.
Oldie but goldie is, I think, a better way of positioning it. So thank you for joining us today on CyberSecurity Heroes. I'm excited to chat to you about what's been happening in the news around Okta and some solutions that you have put in place. And I guess it's good timing for your company, this breach, not for consumers, but...
Well, it's never a bad time for publicity. We just got into a strange situation where something that we've been talking about for a year just happened in the worst case scenario, and finding us in the middle of that kind of a turbulence, anxiety, and a bit of potential around where the company can go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we'll definitely cover some of that today. How is your week going so far?
Well, after the week of the incident with Okta, where we were very busy in helping customers, security, and making sure that they weren't breached.
So in terms of like what's been keeping you up at night other than the obvious with the breach and the news, what's been on your mind?
We established this company around a year and a half ago as an idea, which we tested as a prototype on several Okta customers. And it was quite a good reaction from the customers for them to have the ability to better manage a huge or big environments. And the complexity of managing identity management is growing as the company growth expanding and the pace is expanding for all these companies. The unicorn, the born in cloud companies are becoming huge, and managing huge company, which the entire infrastructure is laid on top of the identity management, is a big burden. So in the past year, we've been working with Okta customers in order to build a product that will allow them to be much more resilient in case of either human error or a cyber breach. We have brought to a very good stage where we have an MVP working, and we have a couple of customers already, paying customers, working with our product in production. More than 10,000 digital identities are protected actually within our product at the moment.
Awesome. So there's no shortage of things that's on your mind right now. Maybe you want to give us a little backstory to you, your background, and you mentioned what you're working on these days. So
yeah. So a bit, let's say late 2014, I was still working at VMware, like a corporate guy. And that was following 10 years of working of the overall EMC conglomerate. I worked both in EMC, RSA, VMware, and on late 2014, Dell purchased the conglomerate entirely, like swallowed everything. And that was an opportunity for me to do something that I was waiting for a long time, and that's to open my own company. And alongside with Itzik, a friend of mine from EMC, we opened a consulting firm. We started to work as a consultant for helping customers moving to cloud, mainly big financial companies in the financial sector or insurance companies. And at that stage, we identified that each step we take, talking about cloud, talking about public cloud and hybrid, the problem starts at the identity management portion. And back then, we thought, okay, what's going to be the next big thing in identity management? We looked for some companies that are doing stuff in the area, and we came up with Okta. Back then, Okta was a 4 years old startup, no presence in the country that I live in Israel. We actually talked with them, and we managed to sign a contract to resell them. That was a beginning of a love story, by my perspective. Since then, after 5 or 6 years, I've become, let's say, identity management consultant in the highest degree, highest certificate, part of the subject matter expert team in Okta, writing the certificates and consultancy certificates. And we became the biggest system integrator for Okta in Israel. And alongside this, building a new startup is a new challenge. And that's why we also added an additional partner to the team. This is Daniel, our CTO. Daniel with a lot of experience in software development for enterprise software development. And the three of us actually are the ones that moving forward this venture. And alongside this time, what happened in Israel is that startup became humongous. So we had a very good startup community in Israel, but it usually haven't been grown a lot. So if it's grown to, I don't know, $50 million or let's say $100 million evaluation, then they were being bought by a big giant. Starting 2015, 2016, these startups started to have bigger and bigger valuations until becoming unicorns. And we are now actually with a bunch of unicorn companies every month are creating in Israel. These companies started as small startups when we introduced them to Okta, and we grow with them. And their growth was a very big challenge, both for us as consultants to make sure that breaches or security is not breached due to the many changes that happens in their environment, and for them also because they needed to implement more and more security measures, going to NASDAQ, IPOs. So that was a really challenging era for us. At the end of that period, late around 2020, we decided to do something with all the knowledge and experience we gained during that time. And we decided to productize this knowledge. And that's where we are today. We opened another company, which is VC funded startup. And we actually are building a product that hopefully will help customers to improve their resilience against cyber attacks.
Yeah, it's an awesome story and really awesome timing as well. Like you have the best launch pad to getting some awareness, but the challenge is making your entrance based on value and not on FUD, as they say, fear, uncertainty, and doubt, which is frowned upon. So I wish you the best of luck in doing that organically.
I really think that that was our main purpose. We haven't looked for building a startup. We have looked for solutions to help our customers. We did identify at this process that it might be able to help more than we thought at the beginning, and going outside of the ecosystem that we understand. And I feel that we hit the pain that we can help there.
Yeah, and it sounds like because of your consultancy firm, you were able to tap into that perfect sort of progression for a product by first listening to your customers' pains. So you first came up with the solution. You didn't invent a product before testing it or hearing it from your customers first. So it sounds like you have that advantage.
Yeah, they say we have unfair advantage since we have kind of 30 or 40 unicorns as close partners, as former customers of Okta. We can actually reach them quickly and ask them what are their requirements and actually show them the product and get some feedback. You're correct. I think that evolution, I'm a biologist, by the way. That's my degree in the university, and I study a lot of evolution. And
is that your fun fact? Is that
Good
your
one.
spoiler fun fact?
Yeah, so I'm a high tech guys. Sorry, I apologize. I'm a biologist, and I had something better, but maybe later. But actually, things are not progressing because you thought about the entire problem and solved it in a one piece. Okay. And it's working for billions of years like that. So I think that the better way is to grow from a pain to having a better understanding of the ecosystem, and then maybe looking in the far ends of the platform or a huge platform. Still, there are products that might be working well in a full scale. In the SaaS arena, which is where we compete in, it is very difficult to do it because there are so many creative SaaS companies, and each one of them is acting differently, is building differently its product, has a different processes behind the scene. You are not exposed to those processes, and in order to be able, as we do, to fully reconstruct an entire Okta tenant in a different account or a pure untouched account, you really need to know intimately the product. Um, and having something like this for the entire SaaS arena is something that require different skill sets, and probably nobody will be able to run in the same pace as a generalist versus being like a specialist in that area.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm gonna give you another chance for your fun fact because we we took one already.
No, it's not so fun, actually. When I was in my military service, I actually was a Stinger fighter. And as a Stinger fighter, which is an American tool, it is quite interesting to hold this thing on your shoulder and aim on a plane. Luckily, we only did it on drills and tests, but it is really, it was the funnest part of the military service.
Yeah, those things are crazy. Well, thank you for sharing that. So I'm excited to chat with you today. As we said, the topic is still very fresh in our minds right now, and I'm referring to the Okta breach. As someone who works very closely with Okta, you mentioned you're the biggest integrator of Okta in Israel, and your startup was actually born out of the insights that you gained from countless Okta integrations and other access management tools for your clients. Did I get that all right?
Yeah, exactly.
So what has come to light from this recent breach, and why should we pay attention to it now?
Well, actually, you should have been paying attention to it last year or 2 years ago or 3 years ago. Let's say the thesis of walking behind our mind when we think about the product that we're building is that nobody is perfect. No matter what security measures you will take, there is always either a technical problem that might bring you to an exposure, but most probably we know people, the human factor is probably the strongest, let's say, challenge for companies. And as the company grow, the challenge grow exponential measures. And building a very good security system, even around a security product like Okta, is a big challenge. But in a split of a second, a person that maybe left his computer open and left to take coffee, or I don't know, neglected something with his daily password scrutiny, or God forbid, if a person got paid to not look at the screen and not pay attention that something is moving without his control, that brings you to an exposure. This exposure, there's tons of examples of how big companies also been compromised this way.
Sorry to interrupt you, but I'm pretty sure that it's been reported that the group behind Okta Lapsus, they are very well known for buying insiders out from companies. That's one of their differentiators as a cyber criminal group.
Yeah, and taking this into consideration when you're a risk officer or the person that's responsible for the risk in your company, we believe that the right way to act is to actually take into consideration that the attacker is already inside, or it's easy for him, or somehow he'll be able to get in. And when we look at the market of cybersecurity products or security products in general, information security, we see that most of the products try to prevent the attacker accessing into the system. But very little of them are focusing on the post-breach recovery, what they call the recovery automation. And when we look at products like Okta compared to, let's say, business applications, in Okta, the content is actually not the information that's stored in Okta as a database. The important thing in Okta and the identity management in general is the logics that within, and the access policies, the permissions, all the content that actually make the business work. Product like Okta, identity access management products, they are the gateway, the sole gateway. If you're doing your security well, it's the sole gateway to the organization. Some companies never reach to a point that all the products really go through the access management systems. And it's really good product, really good product. We trust them 100%. Yet, when you build this complicated infrastructure, you must be able to understand what's within and what has changed during the lifetime of the product. And one of the problems that we saw, first of all, that changes are not documented clearly for an identity management expert to identify changes that were made to the system. And the other one is that there is no ability to download this data for recovery purposes. And there are API and syslog, which kept for a couple of months, but it's not something that you can count on in the case of a disaster. So that's the problem that we were trying to face with our product.
Can you expand a bit on the ramifications of this breach and the domino effect, as you call it?
Of course. So as a sole gateway to the organization, so you probably understand that accessing into the access control system, but identity management system, can grant you the full visibility and control over the entire virtual data center, cloud data center of the company. And with Okta falls, everything falls afterwards. Now, people ask me, okay, so tell me, what actually the attacker will do once he's inside? He wants to steal data, maybe? He wants to sneak in, he wanted to make, and the promise that we give the customer is that you don't need to think what the attacker would do, because you have full control over the situation. So in our case, when we back up all the data that is required in order to recover the system, you cannot, you don't need to actually perceive what the attacker will do. You will be able both to understand what were the changes that he made during the time period is allegedly inside. And in case that he made changes, you can also recover these changes back to normal. But the biggest use case that we are addressing here is not, it is a use case that I've never heard it happened.
And what is the specific use case that you're saying the changes, or what?
No, what we allow the customer to do is take into an example a case where somebody actually attacks an identity of a super admin of a product like identity management, like Okta. As a super admin, even if I'm doing even a part of the super admin in the system or the sole one, I'm able actually to change permissions to the other admins. And in a very short time, I can actually take control over the tenant and lock you out. So in this situation, the question is clear. What do you do when you don't have a control anymore on your identity management product? We feel that such a mission critical system, this question should not be asked. You need to have a solution for that. And that's why we've made, let's say, our biggest promise. We are able to actually replicate the entire tenant to a different account and allow you to start working from a secondary account, which we prepare in advance, of course, with a very clear disaster recovery process that we provide you in order to go back to business fast, while the attacker stays behind. And you can just shut down this tenant, talk to the vendor, tell him, listen, pause the tenant, I don't use it anymore, move all the employees to work with the new one, couple of hours work, and you're back in control.
That's a really interesting solution. So if we will go back to the breach, what should these 15 organizations have done in order to safeguard themselves against this kind of domino effect that you refer to once you're breached?
Yeah, so we advised Okta customers to do was to actually check the admin behavior around the past couple of months. Admin behavior can quickly be identified using the logs if you know how to look for it. And changes within the admin behavior, for example, resetting his multi-factor authentication, for example, may be a sign to this kind of a breach. That doesn't make any effect on what happened because the attacker might have changed stuff during that time, and you need to follow his and track his records using the entire syslog. By the way, if he's been there more than 3 months, you don't have any syslog available to track within Okta. And that's a very special situation where you need to really identify changes in the system. And that's the one of the things that we will provide as part of our system, both the tracking of the changes that made into the posture of the system and to compare the changes to the best practice, which of today there is none solution that does it. Because the best practice is something that does not exist. Using our experience and the experience we gain working with this product, we're able to identify a best practice for the posture of the system, allowing you and alerting you if we see a change into that state, even if it's a legitimate changes in the system.
So actually, the only way to really monitor suspicious activity around Okta is to manually be inside all the time?
Or an automatic system that actually alerts you which something is anomaly happened in the system.
So are you saying that this 1% of their customers, which they say got breached, they would not have had an anomaly detection system in place, or it failed, or whatever? Like, it's not a perfect solution?
Yeah, it's a good question. So Okta reported 366 customers. Customer data was actually compromised. That doesn't mean that customers were actually being breached. It does only mean that this data was extracted somehow from the system that the attacker could reach with. But in fact, when you're providing service as a service provider or vendor to a customer, you probably have some kind of an admin backdoor, privileged admin access into the tenant in case that they need help or assistance. What we did with to our customers is just advise them to check the logs of that specific admin to check if there were actual access trials into the system during that time. Luckily, there weren't ones that we could identify, and it is a very, very big problem when addressing communication between customer and vendor. A very serious problem.
So what can Okta customers do right now? Is it too late, or can they still do something? How would you recommend Okta customers protect their instance moving forward?
So I would advise two main points of improvement that needs to be done with those systems. So first of all, they need to have better control over admin changes into the system. They need to monitor them, they need to alert them, they need to connect them to a SIEM, they need to have good alerts if change. Probably even addressing it with a privileged access management system that can assist in protecting in these cases. The other side of the sandwich, I call it a sandwich, okay, prevent access but also make sure that you have a good backup to the system, segregated, separated from the main system, able to recover both to your production in case of minor change, or in addition, a different tenant in case of a big disaster. A bit similar to what we knew from the past when we had data centers, multiple data centers that were able to recover in case of a disaster in one of them. So it's kind of a new era where SaaS also needs to be able to be recovered because cyber attacks are so abundant.
Yeah, and you brought up a point there around backups, which we'll cover in more detail in a couple questions time. So you wrote an article recently that stated some of Okta's customer statistics from their research that says on average an Okta customer is using 155 applications annually. How concerning is this from a vulnerability standpoint?
Vulnerability is only one question, because of course when you look at it, oh wow, 155 applications, really big. But if you look at it on a disaster and resilience point of view, and I'll ask you, listen, Brandon, your house is on fire. What are the 5 things you're taking because you don't have time? So probably you say, okay, I take my wife, I get the kids and the dog, and maybe a couple of albums from the wedding. Well, you didn't thought about the refrigerator, which brings food and other tons of stuff that you collected during your life. So looking at a business in a disaster recovery perspective puts things a bit differently. And some articles say that in general, in order to bring the business back to life, you probably need something like 10% of your applications to go back to life. And if everybody will write down the top 10 applications that he needs in order for his business to run, probably he will know which applications are there. So in that case, Okta did said that 155 applications, by the way, it's for companies that are with Okta more than 4 years. So that means that they have a significant time with the cloud. And it's a huge amount. And actually we see at least the Israeli unicorns have much more.
And I mean, that also sort of shows that the more time you spend, the more of your crown jewels are getting absorbed into Okta.
Yeah, exactly. And what we think is that if you have an ability in the click of a button to, when you identify a breach, to actually be able to recover to, let's say, former point in time, or to actually recover for a full tenant working, that's much better than having nothing, of course. And that shorten the time that the attacker has to exploit more data from your environment. And that means that we have a leverage over him with a capability.
Got you. And then you mentioned some other alarming findings, and I think we touched on it briefly a few minutes ago. You said that there's no adequate built-in recovery solution, and certainly not with backup and recovery tools. Can you expand on that a little bit more?
Yeah, that's a really good one. When you think about SaaS products, you actually, when you talk about with an IT manager, he tells you this. I don't need to, when I buy SaaS, I buy also their capabilities for having a disaster recovery capabilities, having a recovery from a backup. I don't need to deal with it anymore. And actually, when you look in the small letters in the contract with the vendors, you see that that's not true. And data, and as part of the data, also the state of the tenant that you reside on, the configuration of the tenant, are not part of the vendor responsibility. He is actually responsible for the resilience of the infrastructure, the security, the performance, scalability, etc., but not for this, not for the data and the configuration. That means that even, let's say, that you did well and by yourself managed to export the data outside every day, with all the changes. That doesn't mean that you are able to return the data into the SaaS product. It doesn't mean that the integrity of the data you saved is aligned with what is required within the database. And on the other part, it is a part of the vendor responsibility to not touch your data or not be able to see your data as part of the privacy and data protection rules. So he doesn't want to see your data or to keep your data or store it other place than what he obligated for you. That means that data protection for cloud is something that's going to be a huge thing in the future, because everybody understands that it's their own responsibility.
So is this what you meant when you referred to it as the shared responsibility model?
Exactly. That's a very nice words to say that we are not responsible for your data.
And just to clarify, like Salesforce and I don't know what other vendors you can name, but I know for a fact, according to one of my guests who was on a few weeks ago, we were discussing disaster recovery and data backups, and he mentioned a very big misconception is that your Salesforce is backed up automatically.
Yeah. So Salesforce, by the way, at least allows you to request the backup, to do a backup of your environment. They probably had not a very well recovery capability, because there are several companies that, third-party companies that can backup and recover now Salesforce, and Salesforce themselves tell you as a customer, listen, go and backup with these guys rather than my capability. Salesforce are very good with CRM, Okta very good with identity management, and Jamf are very good with MDM, but they are not backup companies. They are not resilient disaster recovery companies. They have a mission, and they are a startup in a growth stage, and probably in the future they will understand it's part of the responsibility. But we think that being an expert in resilience is different than being a generalist in everything. So we, the team accEMC, which was the queen of disaster recovery and business continuity, we know very well how these products should work, what is the goals of having a product like this, what is an IT manager service level, what is the commitment that he needs to bring to the business, what are the business requirements. And this is why we think that building a product that is focused 100% on SaaS resilience is one of the things that will bring customers in much more control over their business.
So would you say with a fair amount of confidence that most companies have no backup of their identity access management systems?
Well, I'll say in confidence that if you're working in the cloud, not in a hybrid situation when you have kind of ability to back up a server, you probably don't have, not only for identity management, you probably don't have any cloud data backed up. You do have some partial solutions. For example, Google Drive may allow you to keep versions and recover. And maybe you have for emails, and maybe Salesforce, you ask them to recover. But that's not a full-scale solution. And in either way, you do not have this capability for your infrastructure, your SaaS infrastructure, which means the IT of your cloud environment, the identity management and network management, all your as a service tools probably don't have backup capabilities, and for sure they don't have ability to recover themselves in case that you really lost access to the tenant.
And from your experience talking with customers and the market, like if for companies that are aware of it and are doing it, how are they doing it and how complex and time consuming is it?
Well, we have seen large companies with huge teams of engineers as part of the IT that are building self-purpose or self-built or purpose-built tools to assist them in, for example, maintaining changes in the systems. High effort that is being done with automation and integration tools. We ourselves suggested our customers to use Okta API, for example, to download the data, but it is static data. It cannot be, by the way, uploaded in the same format. It's a tough question. Most customers, I believe, avoiding asking themselves, what's the solution that I have? And we hope to bring them a tool that can automate it in a click of a button.
And then last question, we may have touched on this again, but I just want to maybe end this section of the podcast with. So for customers that were breached or are worried, is there a recommended process that they can run through right now that would give them a bit of assurance, confidence?
I can share with you an article that we wrote, a technical article that my team wrote around this situation with recommendations for immediate acts, and it will be quick for these guys to implement it.
Okay, so we could share that in the show notes for anyone listening.
Sure.
Okay, awesome. So I'm going back to the article we were quoting earlier. In that article, you also quoted one of your customers, Lior Zaguri. Hope I'm saying that correctly.
Yeah.
Global IT manager at Monday.com. He said most organizations think they are protected once everything is in the cloud. And if a cyber ransomware, malware attack, or even a misconfiguration happens, you will have the ability from your SaaS provider to recover. This is a misconception. You can only trust yourself and your organization. You need a backup on your side to maintain control of your organization's critical data. This becomes even more important for public companies. Compliance certificates like SOX and ISO require a backup tenant for significant and critical assets like Okta, because if Okta is compromised, it can cause massive damage. And that is why having a backup and recovery ability is so vital. So just unpacking this a little bit, for companies that are complying with SOX and ISO, would you say that they are covered, or they think they're covered but they're not?
Question. So referring to what Leo was said, is one of the first guys that I've met that said, listen, this is my strategic decision. I think it's a part of his experience working with a highly secured company. And the mindset that we have changed with our customers is something that I didn't expect even. Actually, what happens today with our customers, that they are doing what we call DR drills. So we're taking a day when the entire team, not a day, a couple of hours, the entire team actually a decision that the primary Okta is down. Down, attacker has compromised it, huge breach, something really awful happened, and we need to fail over to the secondary one. Having this kind of a drill makes a lot of thinking and as part of the planning phase. Stuff that you haven't thought about even. What are my priorities for applications? Who am I bringing first? What am I telling to my users? What is the risk for the organization? What am I doing with the other business applications in the meantime? Tons of questions you ask yourself. And having a secondary tenant to practice on this allows you to actually think it over during actual hands-on workshop and the actual drill. And this changes the entire mindset of managing cloud, because it is a new way of thinking of the control that you have with your environment. No more, okay, I need to call the support or wait until they answer. Somebody will help me. Somebody will jump in. How fast they will jump in? No. The decision is mine. And
how does it tie into like the compliance certificate? If you have ISO or SOX or whatever, Does that mean these companies have proved that they can back up their instance of Okta or secure it? Like, how is that part of the compliance?
So usually with having a SOC 2 or SOCs, you must prove that you are able to recover following a disaster. In small companies, let's say startups, that means that you need to have a disaster recovery plan for your SaaS, your built-in SaaS infrastructure, which everybody is actually doing, and there are a lot of products that actually allow you and help you do this. Be able to backup, to recover from a backup, or move to another region, another site. But for bigger and bigger companies, the business is not only compromised by the product that is not working. The business might be compromised even if the IT is not working. In that case, the situation is different. When you're on SaaS, what the answer to the SOC compliance, SOC auditor is, listen, I'm on SaaS. I rely on their disaster recovery capabilities. But if you look really into the situation, you understand that that's not the case. And in case of your specific disaster, the vendor will not be able to help you. He might be able to help you, but not to recover you, because you're one out of tens of thousands of tenants he has in his multi-tenant solution. And there is no solution for a specific tenant out of the entire platform.
So it's like this kind of pseudo compliance when you have a lot of SaaS tools, because the misconception is coming from the regulators as well, that they think that the SaaS vendors are backing up the data, but in fact it's not. Is there a disconnect there between the regulators?
I believe that the maturity of companies that are using SaaS is getting better and better. And these things will be part of a regular check in the future. Our mission is to help companies bring this solution and be able to both comply, but also be able to recover their business in reality, and not just get a signature that they are compliant without being able to do so really in reality.
So it feels like there's still some education to be done about SaaS backups.
Yeah, indeed. And I think that all the SaaS, the cloud data protection companies are actually doing a good work around this. SaaS is very complex, as I said. There are a lot of special companies that are specifically handling specific SaaS products, and they are doing a good job in educating the market and bringing the topic to the appropriate position and the prioritization of the companies. And our goal is to be part of that ecosystem and actually protect the critical assets of the business of any IT which is based on cloud.
So could you walk us through a little bit on how your solution works? Are there a lot of similar solutions currently available? Maybe just walk us through how you do it, maybe the expectation, the rollout, and how effective or different is it compared to existing solutions?
So I don't know, luckily for us, but we're there because nobody have actually done this before. And when we introduced the product, immediately customers started to address us because they understand that specifically identity and access management system is so critical. What we do is basically two-step recovery. We are able to back up your entire tenant, including its configuration. And we are able to recover the tenant to any point in time that you wish. But we're also able to recover a tenant to a different tenant, which means that it can provide you both a sandbox environment for testing, but also an additional or a secondary production environment. So that's let's say, the main capabilities and functionality of the system. Having this kind of system really gives you the control, actually 2 clicks, either to back up your system or recover it really quickly.
Awesome. And is it correct to say that you're focused primarily on Okta, or are there plans to broaden the scope? Feel free to share or not share. I know it can be sensitive.
So we are, the platform itself will support all the major identity management products in the market by the end of the year. So it's something that we are already working on and will be launched hopefully soon. That will assist the entire community that uses cloud immediately to protect its most valuable asset. And the roadmap is open.
Awesome. It sounds exciting. So I know we're coming up on the hour here. Is there anything you would like to add before we wrap up here?
Well, I really think that, first of all, I'm honored to be hosted here in your great session. I think you're doing awesome job. I think the cyber community and the IT community are struggling and actually making great job against huge forces, much stronger than their own capabilities. In Israel, we're facing tons of national state attacks, and that makes us, let's say, a bit more concerned maybe than other parts of the world. And that's a good place for us as a startup to grow from, because we are actually meeting the entire use cases that might happen to anybody maybe in a year or two much earlier. And that's about it.
The feeling's mutual. I'm honored to have you on the show, and I wish you all the best of luck in your future endeavors. And if anybody would like to connect with you, pick your brain more on this topic, what's the best way for people to get in touch with you?
Just send me an email, share it in the notes for this podcast, and I'll be happy to answer. I'm both part of several identity management groups. You can also read at our website blog, and hopefully that we'll have more input in the near future.
Thank you so much, Muli, and thank you everyone for tuning in to CyberSecurity Heroes. And until next time, we'll see you then.
Thank you, Brandon.
Thanks. That's a wrap for this episode of CyberSecurity Heroes. Practical and experiential knowledge on a day in the life of security heroes. Catch our next episode by subscribing or following through your favorite podcast platform. If you're listening on Apple Podcast, please leave a rating for the show. They really help a lot. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.